Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry for being a few minutes late, having a few technical difficulties my end. I don't think PCs and technology are really coping with the temperatures that we have at the moment. I hope you've all managed to get yourself a nice cold drink. I certainly should probably have done so, and I apologize for my slightly hot look, but I'm sure I'm not alone in that today. So today we are going to be covering a bit about change management, particularly in relation to the use of AI. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can all follow along as I'm talking today. So today we're going to talk about bringing your team with you, the ultimate change problem inside the AI conversation. A few bits of housekeeping before we get started. To help you make the most of this session, we are recording today, and everyone who signed up, even if you're not here today, will get the recording by email, and you are most welcome to share that with others, with colleagues, and anybody you so wish. Your microphone is deliberately off and you are unable to turn that on, but if you need help at any point, please use the chat capability on the right-hand side of the screen, should be somewhere near the top. And just next to that, you'll also see a Q&A panel. So if you want to ask a question, please pop that question in there. If there are any questions that can be answered as we go along, my colleague Kate may be able to help. However, likely we will pick up those questions at the end. If at the end of the session you still have any questions, please contact your Aptem representative, whether that's your IC, your salesperson, or your CSM. So why are we here today? What we're going to cover is why AI initiatives stall and some of the warning signs that you can see behind them. We're also going to cover what you're actually looking at and trying to change. A bit about what the impact is on people in your organization and what's likely to change. 5 things that a sector gets wrong when making these changes. And of course, we're coming up to our summer holidays, so naturally you'll have some homework to do over the summer. Before we go too far in, just a little bit that I'll mention. There's a Duolingo story that came alongside the fact that in 2025, they released a memo saying they were moving AI first. And there was a major staff and user backlash. Ultimately, the CEO had to walk back and say, I do not see AI as replacing what our employees do. And ultimately would then end to hit the growth. The technology worked. It really did drive forwards a lot of efficiency, but the human conversation was really handled badly and unfortunately done very publicly. The pivot here is that ultimately the same conversation is waiting in every provider in this sector. There's a natural tension between what technology can do and where humans fit into that. And I guess what we're going to talk about today is that humans very much fit into that, but it all rides around your ability to manage change. Over the next sort of 30, 40 minutes or so, we're going to come through that. And please feel free, as I say, to ask any questions as we run through. So first of all, a bit of a shocking statistic. 95% of corporate AI pilots show no measurable return. Now, I don't think that's necessarily representative. It's a bit of a doomy stat to give of the ability of AI to provide measurable return. And a large part of this is it's not the technology that's caused this. It's ultimately a lot of people scrambling after the new toy on the market, which is AI in its various permutations, with tens of billions being invested worldwide, but very little coming to the bottom line. And the large part here is that the technology is ready, but the people aren't. One common trend that I've been talking about through all of these sessions to this point is that AI is a capability. It's not a strategy. The strategy is ultimately what you are changing and how you're going to bring those people along the ride with you. So I'm continuing that story today. AI might be a tooling choice that you make. You already have tools in place. To change a tool, to change a process, to change a practice, you need a strategy to roll that out. And AI itself is not the strategy. The stall happens at the same point pretty much every time, is when an organization jumps from a few enthusiastic individuals who are really grasping on to what this change means, and then scaling that out to adjust how everybody works. And that is the change leadership jump. It's not a technology jump. McKinsey reported that 88% of organizations use AI somewhere, but back to the previous statistic, very few capture real value at the minute. Now, that's still remarkable in some ways, that 88% of organizations use AI somewhere. That's a monumental growth considering the genuinely young age of these AI tools today. So it shows that there's a real passion and energy behind driving this, but we've forgotten to do the change. The other side of this is that Gartner reported that more than 30% of projects are abandoned after the pilot. Now, that can be a really good thing, providing that your pilot is short enough and measurable enough for you to make the decision that, actually, you know what, we've tried this isn't working, let's readjust. Where the mistake happens is, oh, we tried that once, we're not trying it again. A key message to hear today is that incremental small changes are far easier to manage through that pipeline than trying to do a mass change across the board. If you try and do a mass change across the board and you try to do too much at once, you'll almost certainly fail. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. However, it is a really common mistake to make, particularly when hopes are so high of the ability of this new technology to transform our businesses, and we expect it to be done immediately. It takes some work. It takes tweaking. It takes changing, just as with any system you're going to roll out. The final thing here is that MIT, as part of many bits of studies that they did, found that a core problem here is that people were being sort of put second, and the algorithms and the technology was being put first. And critically, you need your people to be on board. And so if those AI initiatives are going to succeed, you need to have brought your people on the journey first every single time, or it will fail. Whether that's because someone is deliberately trying to prevent it succeeding, or just doesn't really feel like they understand the need or the why behind the change yet. Standard change management practices. There are many more warning signs, I'm sure, but if we read each sign here, that are warning signs that perhaps the way that you're approaching something indicates that there's a bit of a change management problem. Really, if you're looking at any more than 2 of these being marked up as a concern or a thing that you're observing, you probably haven't got a technology problem. You've probably got a change leadership problem. Ultimately, typically change management is quite an expensive endeavor. But when we're looking at the technology here, which in and of itself is quite expensive, and we've all probably seen the reports of various organizations like Uber, for example, who have spent their entire budget within a few months on AI, you start to realize that if you don't manage the change well, you've got cost on both sides. I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this purely to help you recognize that you might have challenges that you need to resolve the change side before you consider that the technology was not the correct choice. So this is a really common one. AI living with 2 or 3 enthusiasts, but nowhere else. And when I say live, I really mean ownership. Who takes it on board? Who's adopting it? Who's embracing it? Not who's using it anywhere. You could have your entire organization using AI in a number of places, but the effective use of those tooling residing with only a few individuals is ultimately a problem that's very hard to scale and is a warning sign. If you go off and buy the licenses, but you haven't actually changed anyone's job or what they're doing and their role, well, it's natural, therefore, that they're going to continue to do what they did before. If you haven't readjusted what someone's job looks like in the landscape of rolling out AI to improve and drive efficiency in your organization, then you're really going to struggle in order to actually affect that change, even if you're spending a fortune on licenses for everyone. This is not a case of bringing the horse to water and hoping it drinks. You very much have to take them on the journey and explain exactly what it is you want them to do in this new way of operating. If your only AI guidance is a list of things that staff must not do, which is a really common thing to see, a sort of policy that says, these are all the things you can't use it for, you're probably going to struggle to fail, because not many people have a good map in their head of exactly what this technology can do. And furthermore, what they're allowed to do. Just sharing the not do's is good from a compliance perspective, making sure that you're not doing those things, but it doesn't therefore mean that you've got an effective use of the tool and the system. If you've got people quietly using personal accounts because nothing official was offered, or it was offered too late and with inadequate guidance, this in the world of AI governance is called shadow AI, where someone has gone off and used or purchased a tool themselves, free or otherwise, and they're continuing to use it in the background. I'd be surprised if any single person on this call had not experienced that or was not aware of a colleague that had done it. Perhaps they're not doing it anymore, but this was rife when AI first came about because everyone was hearing about it. And the growth of LLMs and its ubiquity that came pretty much overnight into the market meant that some people were using shadow AI without even knowing it. If you buy a tool and just expect it to fix the problem on its own, sounds like an obvious statement to make, but that is a major warning sign. And it is happening. People are buying tools expecting it to transform their business without much guidance. It's odd, really, particularly when you talk about someone using Claude or ChatGPT and they're amazed by its output. But then they very quickly become frustrated at how slowly, in inverted commas, it might be responding, or how long it might take to do something. And they're not stepping back and going, well, okay, perhaps that took a few minutes, but it would have taken me a day. So you cannot expect the tool itself to fix the problem on its own, and you have to be open and mindful about the genuine improvement that you've seen coming from the tools, but deploy those in an effective way. I'm sure the last one is a problem that you've all experienced many times, particularly when using systems. It's not uncommon in this industry for there to be one champion that sort of leads on a piece of technology, and they're the ones that know everything about that piece of technology, and then, oh, they leave the business. Well, if that happened today with whoever it is in your organization who is championing the use of AI, would it all stop tomorrow? Or maybe better, it might pause or get stuck as you quickly try to work out where your next champion comes from. So before the team and before the tool, we've talked about this in previous sessions, but you need to get clear on what you're actually trying to change and treat your operation as one system, looking at it from end to end. What comes in, what goes out, what interactions are there that run between, and actually interrogate and look at what the most painful areas are and decide how you're going to try and change it and exactly how you're going to measure whether it's changed. So first of all, we're going to name the outcome, the efficiency or scale that you're driving forward, not the tool, not how you're going to do it, but what are you going to do and what does it actually look like? Treating your operation as one system is critically important, and it can get complex really quickly, particularly if you look across your entire provision and your entire landscape. You might sit here and go, how am I going to document out all those hundreds of touch points and hundreds of processes? You don't necessarily need to go that deep, but you should at least take one core or critical path, perhaps run it through a customer journey mapping exercise where you work out every touch point that your customer, your learner, your employer, whoever it may be, what experience do they have? And where's that painful for you and your organization, as well as where is that painful for the customer or end user? If you treat it in this way, you'll quickly identify areas which are rife with waste for you, and therefore can really help you indicate and name that outcome. You don't really want to hand AI today's process. So you're operating in a certain way today. If you purely just try to automate what you're doing today or speed up exactly what you're doing today, you're almost certainly going to be missing out on major opportunities. The process has to change. AI, and particularly most generative AI solutions, are very good at sounding like and behaving like humans in front of you. But the reality is they are technical systems behind the scenes. And what might be the most efficient way that you could have imagined of doing it in the past is not necessarily the best or most efficient way for a piece of technology to do that. Again, you kind of come back to that customer journey mapping piece and work out what is actually the real pain point. What is it we're doing? And then rethink that. If you didn't have to have the touch points that you have today, the human involvement, and work out exactly what the outcome is you're trying to achieve and see if there's a different way of doing it. One of my favorite ways to do this is actually to ask AI itself. So if you've well understood what you're doing today and you've recognized some of the challenges and problems, discuss it with AI. It knows itself best. Be very clear when you're talking to it that you want to optimize this process for automation through agentic solutions. It will step you through it. It will run through and understand what it is you're trying to do and recommend approaches that make sense, that leverage the technology best. Admittedly, that's not necessarily scalable always, but it's a good starting point to get you thinking in the same way that AI might approach a problem. The last thing here is remember that this isn't magic. The whole point here is that you've got a major reward coming, and as a result, there's major efficiencies that can be gained or increased productivity. The effort is not necessarily lower to get that system up and running. Now, the idea is that once you've got the system up and running and it's flowing well, the effort is now lower for you to ongoing maintain it. But that's another thing that I want to highlight. Maintenance is important here. Let's say a month ago, you managed to automate your onboarding process and capture information from learners, and it's all working fantastically. Well, if there's nobody maintaining that or taking in the feedback to how to improve it, then the very next time some rules change or you want to change something about the process, no one is there ready, skilled up, and understanding it. So there is a real cost, even in the automation landscape, of somebody then owning that part of the system. And that tracks me back to one of the previous warning signs. If you've rolled out AI, but you've not changed anyone's job role, that's a perfect example of where you've not done that. So the tool is very easy to get ready on day one. Switching to an embedded AI does not deliver the benefit by itself. I'm going to use Aptem Enhance as a major example here. We have a number of embedded AI capabilities as part of our product. Some of you on this call may be using it. But the return in using that arrives when you reconsider the process you're running and then bring the people along the journey with you. Naturally, some things, for example, our review summarization capability as part of enhanced reviews, allows for that to happen really smoothly. At the click of a button, you can have summarizations through. But other things take time and effort in order to onboard and reap the value. So a little bit of upfront effort, whether it's Aptem that you're using or another system, as another part of your business. It's critical to understand that effort is not zero when implementing things, and that actually, if you want these tools and systems to work really well, you have to redesign the process around it. If you do that and you haven't brought people along with you, you'll still fail. But if you do all of those things at the same time, therefore putting in a good amount of effort, you will find some good success. That is literally true of any embedded AI from any vendor. If it was just going to do exactly what it did the day before AI, what was the point of putting it in there? So this is something I'm sure you've all heard. You may even have thought yourself. I won't lie. When I first started using generative AI and it started helping me do my job on a day-to-day basis, I did have a few existential moments of wondering, well, who am I now? What is my job? What is my job? Is my job going to be taken? But quickly you realize that actually you just need to be really transparent about what it is you're trying to do. So there's many times where people will think that AI is coming along, therefore they must justify their existence. And there are plenty of examples of what we do where job preservation here is a natural move. The human truly must do it. But the blanket statement of a human must do it deserves interrogation, because this is not always true. Ofqual, actually, we had the chief regulator speaking at AELP. Perhaps some of you were there. Well, Ofqual were one of the first to come out with statements about the use of AI. They have said that AI can be used But they've critically said that AI cannot be used to make summative judgment. There still needs to be a human in the loop making those decisions. That's not saying the human must do it. That's saying the human must do part of it. And that same interrogation needs to take place in every process where anybody defaults to the human must do it, and really challenge if that is actually true. The more you do that, the more humans actually can end up feeling a lot more valuable in that process, because they end up enjoying their job a lot more if you've managed to take away some of the administrative or menial tasks that they used to have to do. There is a natural fear of replacement. And honestly, sometimes that will be real. And in fact, certainly if AI continues to accelerate at the rate that it has currently been doing, yes, there are entire jobs and roles across all industries that will be surplus to requirements. That doesn't therefore mean that that individual gets replaced, because there are plenty of other jobs. And particularly in this industry, let's be honest, it's not as if all of you have a lot of slack in your organizations and lots of free time. There are many things that you wish you could have got to and never could. So when we're thinking about ROI here, eventually we might get to entire cost saving. But what we're looking at is the ratio ultimately between what you're able to deliver in terms of revenue and the cost it took to deliver that for every pound of revenue. Now, if you continue under your current cost base, but you increase your revenue by 30%, there is a major ROI gain in that. If all you're trying to do is reduce cost and keep the same revenue, naturally, you're going to have individuals in organizations who are no longer there. But that depends on your own particular growth trajectory. And most businesses will say that what they're wanting to do is grow. Change is hard, but change gets much, much harder if you hold things back and aren't transparent enough, particularly with the ubiquity with which the AI revolution rolled out. People are already thinking about the fact that it might replace their job. So when you're talking with your teams about what it is they're doing, if you start using euphemisms or you start talking about, oh, don't worry, there's absolutely no chance of that without qualification, your team can either tell or they just won't believe you. At Aptem, I think I talked about this in the last session, we're on our own AI transformation as well. But back to my previous point around basically wanting to improve for every pound of revenue that we earn, our efficiency in getting that is not about reduction in force. It's not about removing people from the organization. It's about leveling up what they can do and redefining their roles. And we've been really transparent with that with our team and helping them and encouraging them to learn. Nobody's sitting here thinking or expecting that there will be no job for them at the end of this. Naturally, people have their own thoughts. It's only so far you can go with honesty. But please, bring people along the journey, and transparency goes a long way. And yet still, AI almost certainly will not take your job. Certainly not as it stands at the minute. But genuinely, a person who is good at or skilled at or proficient with AI really might. So the learning now is for each individual. What they need to be developing to do is to work out how AI can be used in their role and in their function to great effect. And that is the value add that individuals will now have as part of their CV. If anybody's trying to hire an AI specialist at the minute, it's remarkable how many of them say that they've got decades of experience. Well, they don't, because it hasn't been around long enough for them to have so. But the more you build that real world experience, the more you build out your portfolio of things that you have done and the value you have brought, the more valuable you get to this organization that you're currently in or any future organization. The point here is that each individual will likely spend less time in operational detail and more time on that value, on the governance of how those AI systems run and the practices that you follow, and ultimately always working towards outcomes rather than the typical operational detail that they had before. In our sector, yes, the near-term reward is productivity and likely not a smaller team. I can't say that with absolute certainty for every business. Each business will run their business as they so wish. But as I said before, we aren't an industry where there's a lot of slack. There aren't a lot of people sitting around already running at 80% or 60% capacity. Pretty much everyone you speak to, true or not, will feel that they are overstretched for what they have to do. So if we introduce better productivity through the use of these tools, and we compound that with a statement of intent around what it is you're trying to do in the case of productivity, then hearts and minds are easier to win over. So 5 things that we tend to get wrong about change leadership, and this is not unique to this industry, this is pretty much true across the board. Number 1, AI is treated as a rollout, not a redesign. This isn't like moving from Google Sheets to Excel. What you're moving from and to here are not necessarily analogous. They are not a perfect fit. There's a totally different way of even interacting with AI tools versus what has been done in the past. And as a result, a redesign is needed on both process and interaction. The second big mistake is just saying no instead of saying here's how and safely. And that doesn't mean to say you can't say no in saying that, but you need to explain the whys of a no and the whys of a yes as well, because that is the thing that's going to build people's knowledge and practice and make it habitual to understand how they can use AI and come up with their own ideas to help feed that very same list. Waiting for a mandate, but then making staff comply is also another major mistake. So if you're waiting for this big rollout decision and then mandating to every member of your staff that they must immediately start using these tools, you've not managed to take people on that change journey. They've not understood why they're doing what they're doing or what the value is or what the outcomes are. There are plenty of organizations in this industry and otherwise that have said, everyone use Copilot, everyone use ChatGPT. For what? That's a tool. It doesn't explain what it is they're meant to be doing. And I'm all for experimentation. In fact, we did a similar thing ourselves where we said, hey, let's see what you can do with it. But there were sort of guardrails and an expectation set around what those tools could do and therefore how someone should safely use it. And that leads me back to in one of the very first sessions we talked about building out that AI charter, building out that understanding of what you can and can't do, because that covers off both how you use something safely and also helping people understand where they use it rather than just mandating you must use it. The other thing, and this is true of any project, you can have big and transformational goals as part of a larger program. But if your first project is big and transformational, then you end up probably coming and sitting in those statistics I shared at the start, with 95% of these AI rollouts not producing the value that was estimated, or 30% of your pilot projects being abandoned. If you don't start small and real and not only see some value quickly, you're not going to be able to reinforce that hearts and minds exercise of, no, this really is beneficial to your organization, and you'll get stuck in a loop. And I think what AI has proven is our ability to transform and adapt far more readily and far more quickly than we ever have before, which also means you can iterate more quickly, and it's less costly to iterate a small thing and fail it than it would be to spend a lot of time working on something that ultimately fails. I would say this, I'm from a technology organization, but there is a lot that can be learned from agile practices and iteration and small periods of time working on specific and measurable things. It builds confidence, it builds value, and ultimately is far more attractive than working on one single big and transformational project. But I need to be clear, you still need that big and transformational, let's call it a BHAG, a big, hairy, audacious goal. You still need to know where you're aiming towards, but don't try and expect to get it overnight. Finally, that leads to funding the licenses, but not the time and training to learn and to experiment. I don't know what it's like in your organization, but if everybody suddenly got a license overnight, did that mean that they've transformed? Do they know what they're doing? If you're tracking usage of any of these tools, you'll probably realize that a lot of people are not engaging with it quite as you would hope they would. You need to have a backbone in here of giving time for people to experiment and to learn, and also the training material so that they understand what they can do, and critically, back to point 2, here's how they do something safely. I want to talk about something called ADCAR. That might be something that's familiar to you. It's a widely used people change model, and it's more than 20 years old, I believe, at this point. But it does talk to some really quite helpful frameworks around how you can think about change. You want to look at each of these 5 stages. First, you're moving towards awareness. You're making people aware of what it is you're intending to do, your goal, your objective, teaching and learning about what it is that you're aiming towards, but also the tooling that you're driving towards. Desire is your most critical point. You need to evangelize. You need to drive and foster a desire in the people in your teams and even in yourself about why they really want to do this. What's in it for them? Why is it valuable and helpful? And the reason why I like this model more than others is it really tries to tackle this bit up front. Because if you don't tackle this bit up front, you're really going to struggle to get through into the remainder of that change. You move from that desire into knowledge building, gaining that understanding of how you're going to actually operate in this new change. What does that look like? Training, learning, guidance. That then allows you to move into the ability to actually operate that, to actually use it, to try it, to build on that awareness, desire, and knowledge that leads ultimately into a reinforcement loop where you can loop back and check in on whether desires were met, whether knowledge still needs to be improved, whether further awareness is required, and whether you need to re-loop through the same process. But if you skip any of these stages, you will really find that you will struggle to make the change succeed. And many people will jump from senior leadership awareness into ability. They completely skip the desire and knowledge across the board, or they do it in a small group of individuals. And the danger of that is, of course, you might be highly effective, but you then have that one champion problem where actually there are 2 things that have happened there. That individual or those champions have become very highly skilled. As a result, they're worth a lot more. So what's keeping them in your organization? Every organization is looking for somebody to come and help their change. If you've only got a few people that are really part of that, your landscape of governance there is pretty weak, and those individuals may choose to go elsewhere because there's a better job in it for them. There's more change in it for them, particularly the individuals that are really apt for that kind of change. They tend to like going and fixing problems all over. Underneath it all, though, you need a sponsor who owns why, and then champions that carry the how. And champions plural is critical. The sponsor is really important because they're there to make sure that if there is a requirement for additional budget sign-off, if there's a requirement for a leadership drive, they're there to make sure that there's weight behind any project. But it's ultimately the champions that do the body of the work. So I'm about to finish. I'm sure you're all pleased to hear, but here's your homework. So I want you to think about that ADCAR model, and I want you to step through, following on from all the work we've done in previous sessions, assuming you've done your homework. I probably should have been checking. Maybe I should have enrolled you all into Aptem and put you on a program. Is to take all of those things that you've been thinking about on your friction backlog, on what you're doing in terms of policy and what you want to change, and in your awareness stage, name that change. Don't name the tool, but then pick one process. You've probably already done this if you've been following along with that friction backlog and working out what you'd want to change. The bit that you should spend the time on is having an honest conversation with the team, those that will be impacted, and talk about what's going to change and why, and how it impacts them, and critically, why it's good for them. Because pretty much every one of these changes is good for people. There may be a handful that aren't, but honesty is still your best policy here. Follow into the knowledge and ability part and redesign the process that you're running towards, and then fund the time and the training to actually make that happen and get into practice. Again, if you go too big here, this step will take too long, and therefore the awareness and desire that you spent so much time building starts to peter off. Make sure that you reinforce this with named sponsors and with champions. Make sure that you're aiming towards getting this out and have autumn as your season where you affect and share this change with the organization and teach them what the value and benefits were. That brings us to the end of today's session. But let's see if we have any questions. And if you haven't thought about having questions, now's your time. I'll pause here for a moment. I've either stunned you all into silence or potentially you've all passed out because you're too warm. I apologize for my shiny forehead. I can't really do very much about that. No, absolutely fine. I will be following up with a bit of a worksheet that goes through ADCAR a bit. That will be a bit of a takeaway for you. That will follow via email, and of course the recording is available. We'll be sending out some information about the next webinar, but we are going to be on a bit of a break now. As I understand, lots of people are going away over the summer, and you're all getting ready towards your end of year and new academic year. So we'll be starting these up again in September or October. And now, of course, all the questions start coming through. Excellent. Cool. I'm glad there were some, so let me have a look. Sophia, when you say fund license, not the time and training, can you explain a bit on that, please? So a lot of organizations, when they're like, hey, I really like this tool, will go and say, well, how many people have I got in my business? Oh, I've got 100. Let me buy 100 licenses. And they bought the 100 licenses, but they haven't actually encouraged the usage of it yet. And there are several ways you can do this. You can take a small test group, pilot it out, get them as your champions or whatever that tool is. Or if you're thinking about this in the way that I've been talking, which is your process that you're following and the outcome you're trying to drive towards, working on that change management principle in ADCAR of doing awareness and desire first naturally means that when you then make your tooling purchase decision as you head into knowledge and ability, you've already got people that are chomping at the bit wanting to do it. There is absolutely waste. You might be okay with it, but there's absolute waste in saying at the start of a project, I know I need 10 tools and buy all 10 tools to then have them sit on the shelf while inevitably you work through the rest of your problem. What gets really good here is when naturally as each of these small projects that you do end up needing the same tool. Well, you've already done part of your work then. You've already done part of your work in awareness and desire and knowing how that tool is starting to work. So your iterations on each part of that process change get better and get easier because you've already got a bunch of champions that are really keen on whatever it is that you're trying to do. I hope that explains it a bit better for you. James Major, what have you said? Are there any crib lists of Gen AI strengths and weaknesses? Yes, there are. I think I shared one. If not, I'm happy to create one and therefore and give you a bit of an understanding there. Bear with me. I haven't got that to hand straight away. One thing I will say is depending on what tool you're currently using, AI is quite good at critically evaluating itself and other tools. So again, start with the problem and the process you're trying to solve. And there's no harm, even if it's trash and you take it away and you go, hey, I don't want to see that anymore. Just asking that AI, hey, this is a problem I want to solve. What's the best generative AI tool that I could use for this? I found Claude to be pretty honest. When it knows that something is better, it's pretty good at telling you something else is better. But naturally, they're always going to have a bias towards using their own tool. So I'll work on some sort of strengths and weaknesses list for you and hopefully share that out in the coming month or so. And finally, we've got one for Tracy. So we've rolled out Copilot with some training, but our aware staff are not using it to its potential. We have champions and doing the training, but probably need to get to follow ADCAR to try to get staff to be honest in their feelings now, 12 months down the line. Yeah, that's a good point. So if you're already partway through a process or a rollout of some change, it's never too late to introduce something like ADCAR. Obviously, it's better if you did it at the start, but try and recover a project. Like if you're maybe not sure it's going as well as it could have done, you can still apply that model to reevaluate. The critical and most important part is the reinforcement loop that sits at the end. And so it might make sense, Tracy, for you to start with that reinforcement part, because that will tell you all the bits that you didn't have before, and then you can rerun the loop through from awareness through to desire and do it properly. Lovely. I think that's the end of the questions. So I wish you all a wonderful and tropical rest of your day, and I will see you again in a month or two. Take care, everyone.